Sorry for the interruption. When I left you, I was beginning to add in the complementary color in my darker areas. The complementary goes in the darkest of the shadows on your object. So as you can see, I'm adding in a thin layer of apple green to begin to darken this color. And you can see it's already changing the color of the red. As I move up into a slightly lighter area, it's still a bit dark, so I'm going to use my next darkest, which is red-violet. You can see as I color this in that I'm slightly overlapping into my green area and my non-green area. That's going to help my transition appear smooth and not stripy. And as I move up a little bit further, I'm using even less pressure so that I have a lighter area of the red-violet. Again, as I move closer to my lighter area, I'm then into my plain old local color. So again, overlapping a bit with what I've already done to make my transition smoother. I can add another layer of red in there. So if you squint your eyes, you can already start to see this beginning to fade up into the light. As I move even closer, I want to use a little hint of my warm color. Now, I don't want it to look like my highlight has a fiery halo around it. So I want to make sure that I'm only adding this just at the very edge of my local color. Just a little, as it's going to start to fade up into the lighter pink tones. And then I'll add white. Across the edge of my highlight. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in this entire light area with a thin layer of white. Now I'm going to go back and complete this area before I move up here. So I'm going to take my local color and I'm going to put the lid on my sandwich. So I began with a thin layer of red to kind of lay everything in and establish my lights and darks. I added in all of my analogous and complementary colors to start to build and enhance my different colors, and now I'm adding red back on top, which is going to kind of unify all of my colors and make them really look like they all belong in the same object, and they're just variations of the same color. And as I move closer to my highlight, I use less and less pressure. And I may even go back with even another layer of red, because I'm going to squint my eyes at this and make sure that everything looks like it's transitioning and blending smoothly. So now I've got a really good start to making this bend in the ribbon look really realistic. So now I'm going to come up to this area, and as my ribbon curves away from me, it's going to get darker as it kind of hides behind itself. So I'm going to use this exact same process, but on a much smaller scale. So everything's going to be in smaller little segments. So I'll start with my complementary color to work in my darkest. Right along that edge and just down into that little wedge right there where it's going to be the darkest. I'll come back in with a bit of violet to create my red violet. A little extra local color. And those are the places where the light is not making the color darker or lighter. It's just plain old red. Right smack in the middle. A bit of warm color. Because warm colors always tend to be coming towards us while cool colors tend to be pushing away from us. So by adding this little bit of warm, it's going to really make it look like the curve of the ribbon is kind of coming out towards us. And then I have my lightest with the white. I can go back and add my sandwich layer, my lid on top of there. I want to make sure I really get on top of that little bit of green. So I kind of turn my pencil so that I have a little bit of that pointier spot. Alright, so now you can see this is really starting to take shape. So now I'm going to use a combination of my colorless blender and my local color to start really solidifying everything. Now, if I were completing the entire ribbon, I would finish this whole process along the whole curvature of the ribbon, working in small sections. Notice how I did this little section and then this little section. You don't have to do, you know, local color all over and then dark all over and then medium all over. Work in small sections and build each section up individually. So I would kind of complete this process all over and then I would go back in with my blender once I kind of have everything exactly where I want it. So as I start blending, using some cross contour motion, you can see how these colors are going to kind of start pushing themselves up into that buffer zone that I left, which is why it's important to make sure that that area is a little bit bigger than you really want it to be, because inevitably you're going to make it smaller as you start blending, because you'll start kind of smushing your colors up into there. I'm going to turn my paper. So when I start to look at this, I can really see this curvature of my ribbon. And if I feel like some areas aren't dark enough, I can go back in. Now once I've used my colorless blender, it's a little bit harder to change things. It's not as easy. So make sure you use that colorless blender only when you're really sure. But I want to enhance this contrast to make this look a little bit more three-dimensional. So I'm going to use a little more of my complementary color and my cool color. Now in this area, I'm still not pushing hard. I'm still just adding thin layers on top. Prismacolor is all about layering. And adding more red. On top. And now this ribbon is really starting to take form and look more three-dimensional. So I have a semi-finished version here. You can see that I've layered in everything, and everything's still kind of in that sketchy thin mode before I've gone in with my blender. So you can see how I went through and I added in all of my lights and darks all around before I started in on my blender. So you're going to continue working through your ribbon, trying to capture all of the lights and darks. And remember, the more variations that you can look at and see in this area, the more realistic it will look. So the more you can see that this dark is different than this dark, the more realistic your renderings will be. So good luck!